Former hitman Arthur is living quietly in Rio de Janeiro under a fake name after faking his death. One afternoon, while relaxing at a restaurant, a woman named Renee approaches him. She knows his real identity and works for a powerful man who wants to hire Arthur to kill 3 enemies, making it look like accidents. If Arthur refuses, her boss will reveal he's still alive to criminals. Arthur pretends he needs to make a phone call, but instead, secretly takes a picture of Renee. She pulls out a gun, but Arthur quickly flips the table at her, rejecting the offer. Her henchmen attack, but Arthur fights them off using his self-defense skills and whatever objects he can find, even the restaurant grill. He escapes by jumping onto a passing Skytram, but Renee and her team follow him and start shooting. She even tries to climb up to him, so Arthur jumps onto a hang glider to get away. Later that evening, Arthur returns to his boat, only to find suspicious men snooping around. Using a remote control, he sets off the bombs he had prepared for emergencies, blowing up the boat and killing the men on board. After that, he heads to an old container where he keeps his tools, burns his old passport, and takes on a new identity. Later, Arthur moves to Thailand, where his friend May gives him back his old hut. Under the floor, Arthur has hidden more weapons and tools, and he immediately starts researching a woman named Renee. He finds out she works for Crane, a dangerous criminal he knows well. The next day, a woman named Gina comes to May's place asking for first aid supplies. May notices bruises on her, but Gina refuses any extra help. That night, May hears screams from one of the boats and sees Gina being abused by a man named Frank. May asks Arthur for help. Although he doesn't want to get involved, he feels he owes May. When he gets to the boat, Arthur politely asks for Gina, but Frank attacks him. Arthur quickly defends himself, and when Frank falls, he hits his head and dies. Gina faints when she sees the body, and May comes to help, bringing her to shore. Arthur finds a gun, Gina's passport, and a phone with his picture on it. After that, he sets the boat on fire. When he gets back to the hut, he wakes Gina up, points the gun at her, and demands to know if she works for Crane. Gina tries to take the gun, but Arthur overpowers her and forces her to talk. Gina reveals that Crane did send her, but she doesn't actually work for him. He's blackmailing her. Her role was to act like a helpless victim to catch Arthur's attention, and Frank went too far with his part. The plan was for her to get close to Arthur and then contact Crane, but Arthur refuses to let that happen. He'll decide when Crane's men show up. The next day, Arthur learns that Gina was part of a humanitarian group helping in Cambodia. Arthur asks her what Crane is holding over her. Gina explains that she used to run a shelter for human trafficking victims. A few weeks ago, one of her staff disappeared, and 2 days later, the body was left at her doorstep. Crane's henchmen threatened to kill the kids in her care unless she agreed to do this job for him. Later, Arthur spots a boat with men watching the shore, likely sent by Crane. To make them believe Gina's mission is going as planned, Arthur walks around holding her hand. May notices the chemistry between Arthur and Gina and sets them up through some old Thai traditions at a party she's hosting. Arthur and Gina end up having a great time together. Later that evening, Gina apologizes to Arthur for dragging him into the situation. Arthur reassures her, explaining that he understands because he was also an orphan. He reveals that he was sold to a gangster who trained child soldiers, and Crane was part of that world too. Arthur managed to escape, but Crane didn't, and Arthur thinks Crane now wants revenge for being left behind. Gina and Arthur share a kiss and spend the night together. Afterward, Arthur promises her that he's been making plans for her to escape safely without risking the kids. He also vows that he won't kill for Crane, except for Crane himself. Arthur gives Gina his father's watch, the only thing he has left to remember him by. The next morning, some policemen show up at the beach, but Gina recognizes one of them as Crane's man. While Arthur fights them off, Gina gets kidnapped. Arthur is forced to agree to meet with Crane, who demands that Arthur carry out 3 killings and make them look like accidents if he wants Gina back. The first target is Krill, a top arms dealer in Africa, currently in a Malaysian prison. Crane gives him a pill to take after the kill so they can track him. While Arthur is working, Gina is hidden on one of Crane's boats. Arthur heads to Malaysia to study the prison, which is on cliffs and surrounded by shark-infested waters, making it impossible to break in. He prepares by getting powerful explosives disguised as chewing gum, shark repellent hidden in a skin cream tin, and a pill concealed in a cigarette. He also makes a fake ID and poses as a notorious criminal. Once Arthur steps onto the streets of Malaysia, he's quickly recognized and arrested. The prison guards don't notice anything strange about his items, so they let him keep them. For the first few days, Arthur lays low and talks to other prisoners to gather info on Krill. Krill always has men watching him because many want him dead, even inside the prison. He runs his business from there and is the real power in the prison. Arthur notices a knife pass between prisoners, and during lunch he bumps into them to discreetly steal it. Later, one of Krill's former men tries to kill him for revenge, but Arthur steps in and kills the attacker with a knife. Impressed by Arthur, Krill invites him to dinner. Arthur agrees, but only if Krill leaves his men outside. Surprisingly, Krill agrees, and in the evening, Arthur is taken from his cell to Krill's private hut. During dinner, Krill offers Arthur a job, but as soon as Krill turns his back, Arthur attacks and kills him by choking him. He then mixes the snake venom Krill used for rituals into his drink to make it look like a suicide. The guards outside grow suspicious, but Arthur arranges Krill's body in a praying position, making them think the silence is for religious reasons. Afterward, Arthur places explosive gum on a prison wall to create an escape route. He swallows a pill, covers himself with shark repellent, and jumps into the water before the police can catch him. Crane's men are waiting for him on a fishing boat, and Arthur escapes safely. Crane video calls Arthur, showing Gina is safe and giving him his next target. Adrian Cook, a human trafficker living in Australia. A few days later, Arthur begins investigating his new target. Arthur finds out that Cook's penthouse is impossible to break into, but Cook has a pool that hangs over the street. Arthur rents a helicopter to observe the building from a distance. He then pretends to be interested in an apartment close to Cook's, and while the realtor shows him around, he distracts her by calling her phone. During this, he snaps a picture of the apartment keys to make a copy later. Arthur also creates a small but powerful explosive using chemicals designed to break glass and make it seem like a pressure-related accident. A few days later, Arthur disguises himself as a technician to get into the building unnoticed. Using the copied key, he enters the apartment. With special equipment, he climbs out the window and scales the building up to the pool. He places his explosive inside a small hole he makes in the glass. While Cook is swimming, he notices Arthur, but before he can react, the glass starts to crack. Arthur quickly escapes, sliding down the building as the pool shatters, and Cook falls to his death. Meanwhile, Crane sees the news about Cook's death and orders his men to prepare for the next video call. Gina notices they position her near a window that shows the full number of a boat, so she adjusts the camera to frame the window. When the call starts, Gina raises her hand and shows Arthur her watch, trying to get him to notice the number on it. The henchman notices and ends the call, but Arthur manages to catch the number and uses it to track down the boat. Later, Arthur gets a helicopter to follow Crane's boat, and he dives into the water with a bag of special gear. He hides the bag under the boat, sneaks aboard, and starts taking out the guards one by one. But he's spotted, and soon he's fighting a group of thugs while Gina is dragged out of the room. She tries to defend herself but isn't skilled enough and ends up being taken to a helicopter. Arthur tackles one of the guards, grabs his grenade, and uses it to knock out the thugs chasing him, using the guard as a shield. Unfortunately, more men arrive and tase him, capturing him. Later, Gina and Arthur are taken to another boat where Crane reveals he knew Arthur would try something like this, but insists he still has to do the third kill. After Crane leaves, Arthur fights off the guards instead of letting them take him away. He jumps into the water, retrieves his hidden gear and oxygen tank and a small engine, and escapes safely. A few days later, Arthur is in Bulgaria, where he learns that his next target is Max Adams, an American arms dealer. As he digs deeper, Arthur finds out that Adams has a heavily secured fortress where he stores submarines armed with intercontinental missiles. Arthur also realizes that Crane, the person behind the kills, is eliminating his competition in the arms trade, which makes Arthur reconsider his mission. After this, Arthur shoots one of Adams' guards from a distance. He then sneaks onto the roof of a hospital and hides in an emergency helicopter. The helicopter pilot flies to Adams' fortress to check on the wounded guard, and while everyone is distracted, Arthur slips into the building. Inside, he jams the security cameras and starts taking down the guards. The building goes on high alert, and Adams is escorted to his panic room by his henchmen. Arthur delays their escape by sabotaging the elevator. By the time Adams reaches his panic room, Arthur is already there waiting. Instead of killing him, Arthur offers a deal to team up against Crane, and the plan starts with Adams faking his own death. Adams is inspecting his submarines when a bomb suddenly goes off on a nearby bridge. Arthur, who is waiting underwater, shares his oxygen tank with Adams and helps him swim to a beach. Meanwhile, Crane watches the explosion on TV, where the news reports that Adams is trapped underwater under debris. At that moment, Arthur calls Crane to tell him about a third kill, but Crane refuses to believe him without seeing the body. Arthur insists that they can find the body underwater, so Crane orders his men to locate Adams' body and eliminate Arthur. Back at the submarine pen, Arthur sets up several traps. When Crane's henchmen arrive, they trigger the traps one by one, dying in the process, while Arthur picks off those who manage to avoid the traps from the shadows. Realizing Arthur is targeting him next, Crane uses Gina as bait, placing her outside. Arthur swims to the boat and begins taking out all the guards. Crane sees this on the security footage and tells his men to bring Gina inside. Just as Arthur destroys the cameras, Gina fights back against a guard who grabs her, but she gets hurt in the process. The guard then throws her into a jacuzzi for Crane to take her. Meanwhile, as Arthur continues to battle the guards, Crane takes Gina inside and activates an explosive hidden on the boat. He tries to escape in his rescue boat, but just then Arthur finds Gina and learns about the bomb. He puts her in an emergency pod and sends her away. Then Arthur goes after Crane, taking out the last guards before a fight breaks out. Crane grabs the anchor chain and tries to capture Arthur by his leg, but Arthur uses the chain to tie Crane to the boat. Crane laughs, thinking Arthur has taken too long and will die too. However, Arthur isn't worried and runs inside just before the bomb goes off. Gina watches the boat explode and catch fire, crying over Arthur's presumed death. At least the explosion reveals their location, and she gets rescued by the Coast Guard. Meanwhile, Adams watches from the shore and notices something strange about the debris in the water and a nearby security camera. Weeks after, Gina is back in Cambodia with the kids and writes to thank me for the water filter donation. One afternoon while she's teaching, she's shocked to see that Arthur is alive and has come to visit her. Meanwhile, Adams is researching Crane's boat and discovers that it has a diving bell, which holds air so divers can breathe underwater. With this idea in mind, Adams looks at the security footage and realizes that Arthur escaped by hiding in the diving bell. Impressed by Arthur's clever plan, Adams decides to delete the footage to protect him. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.